For more on Iran nuclear negotiations, I'm joined by Joe Costa. Joe is a senior associate at the Cohen Group and has done extensive work on nuclear proliferation, Iran, and U.S. foreign policy. Joe, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great
So
to
we
be here.
keep hearing words like substantial progress, momentum, optimism. But let's get to the nitty-gritty. Was anything accomplished in Vienna?
Absolutely. I think what you have here over the course of the last year so far is really a building of trust over time. If you're dealing just with the United States and Iran, it's been more than 30 years where they haven't had diplomatic relations. Now we're getting to a point with the U.S. and its international allies where they've started to work on basic confidence building measures. What this means is suspension of some sanctions. It means that Iran has suspended some aspects of its nuclear program. What occurred then in Vienna this last time was continuous work on some of these very difficult, challenging, technical, complex issues dealing with sanctions in its nuclear program. But ultimately, we should look at it as a very positive sign that all parties agreed to meet again in December to continue to extend for another 7 months versus saying, let's call it off and possibly risk a slide back to crisis and confrontation.
But Joe, that's 7 months from now. A lot can happen between now and then. And some might say the fact that something could happen could deter a final deal.
Absolutely, and I think this is exactly what some of the risks are. And to be honest, what some of the hardliners or opponents of a deal are looking at. How can they use this time to their advantage to possibly derail talks? So you'll have some hardliners in Iran that'll try to use this window of time to see if they can break apart the coalition and what has been a superstructure of sanctions that have been imposed on Iran and try and see if they can somehow derive some benefits from that. You have the United States Congress and some Republicans now saying that when they're in power in January, they'll start to pass additional sanctions against Iran. So there's all sorts of risks that are imposed. But this is a very difficult, tough international negotiations, what you should expect.
So some of the most thorny issues are Iran's capacity for enrichment, sanctions, of course, duration of the deal. The fact that no substantive deal was reached today, does it indicate they're still really far apart on these issues?
They are. There are huge gaps that remain. It is enrichment, it is sanctions, it is the verification and inspection regime where what the world is calling for would be the most intensive verification regime ever imposed on a country. So there are large gaps that do remain. With that said, if you look back to where we were a year ago today, we have made tremendous progress. It's really a testament to all parties involved right now that they're saying we are looking for some sort of an arrangement versus a situation of crisis and confrontation that could lead to very disastrous consequences.
When I listened to Secretary Kerry give his news conference, he said, U.S. is not driven by a political agenda. Do you think Iranians back home really believe that this has nothing to do with politics?
Well, of course, there's politics involved here. It's a politically energetic situation, unquestionably. But I think what the domestic populations are looking for on both sides is the other party showing a good faith effort to try and reach some sort of an arrangement. And it's hard to get through the rhetoric, to be honest.
And then, of course, President Rouhani said the most important achievement of Iran talks is common understanding that negotiations are the only way to a final deal. So what is the cost of failure, Joe, if there is no deal come July 1st?
I think the cost is very high. I think it's very easy to imagine a scenario whereby we slide back into crisis and confrontation that can spiral out of control and I think lead to some very unintended consequences. You have Israel has made clear that an attack is not off the table. You can have a new U.S. president in 2 years' time that could fundamentally change the dynamic. So, a year in international politics, the stakes are high. And so I think it's really important that we continue to hammer out some of these details to see if we can get a little bit closer on these gaps, which is why I think all the parties did decide to meet again in December.
Agree to keep talking. That must be a good sign.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe Costa, for your time.